Thank you very much. Here's what we're going to do. Dr. Muller and I are going to break up the session into two different sort of focuses. I will speak about something I've been working on, which is a health risk index and how that really impacts every community in the United States. And then Dr. Muller is going to talk about what's going on in the economy with respect to hiring. I have put together a risk model that is community-based, that is based on the social determinants of health. And that is really key for our economy, understanding where risk is. We were able to predict where COVID-19 would impact each and every community on a scale across the United States. And I want to talk about that for a little bit. So we did, really what we're doing here is bringing together the social determinants of health as a way of investigating communities. So economic stability, neighborhood stability, education and literacy, food, when you think about meat production plants and the impact on small communities that the virus has had, the healthcare system itself, just social interaction in general. So we created a model and understanding key issues. We wanted to understand, we wanted to know how the virus posed a risk on communities. We wanted to create an opportunity to be able to have a strategy. As you know, we hear on different media sources, we hear about the state. This state is doing bad, that state is doing bad. It's not really about states, it's about communities. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and how really we can see that through the model and the prevalence of the disease itself. And we want to allow people to have a way in which to plan and move forward with respect to opening up the economy. So we need data for better decision making, and we need predictive models. We need to make local decisions, not state decisions. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation for communities. And we need to be able to have action versus lockdown. So what I want to talk about is the model itself and how it was created. Really, we're using an interdisciplinary approach. You know, you hear a lot in the media about epidemiologists making decisions. It's not just about epidemiologists, it's about community and social planners, social scientists, educators coming together to make a decision. And what we really have heard is sort of this piecemeal media of how the disease is affecting the community. In some cases, it's race. In other cases, it's density. In other cases, it's workplace interaction. So shutting down the economy. And in other cases, it's preconditions, diabetes, heart condition, smoking, etc. So it's actually all of that. And we decided to do a very data-driven approach at looking at risk back in March when this all started. So we can see that these key, we developed 4 key themes out of this, and that was preconditions, population density, workplace interaction, and population health in our model. So when we did go through and bring those together in a multivariate model, we were able to see exactly where problems were occurring, and places like Los Angeles and New York, and why not in San Jose versus New York City. Our index was able to tell us at the market level where things were a serious risk. And we can see that with this map from tier 1 markets and tier 2 markets. Tier 1 markets we would define as the top 36 markets with 1 million or more in the in labor force, and tier 2 with 100,000 to 1 million in labor force, and then the tertiary markets. And we could score each market based on those 4 key themes that I talked about with an overall risk index. We have followed this model through from the beginning, and we have a correlation coefficient of 0.75 or better on each and every one of the key themes. So it's unfortunately, as we follow the prevalence of the disease, the model just gets stronger and stronger as far as being able to predict what the issues are in each community around who's being affected and how those key themes are allowing us to determine what to do in those different markets. I want to just flip over to Texas and the colleges here in Texas and look at the actual interactive model, which I'm going to go to right now. I just click and go in. You can see here that this is today what's going on with COVID. This is a live report of the entire country with cases. And when you look at a legend, you can see that the more, as we drive toward red and yellow, we can see that there's more serious cases, a number of cases in those locations. So as we come back out and we zoom into Texas, we can start to get an understanding of what that looks like. Also putting on our risk model and seeing where risk is and the Texas cases themselves. So you can see when I go back and forth here, we've been able to predict very accurately where the riskier communities are. And then when we overlay colleges, we can start to get a very good sense of, and the districts themselves. We start to come up with a data-driven decision support tool that allows us to make decisions about Texas and the colleges in Texas and what's at risk, and being able to monitor the disease as well in those locations. So I'll go back to the slides. So application, risk can be managed and understood, but not eliminated. Again, we can model this down. We now model it down to a zip code, again, with the same degree of accuracy with respect to the correlation coefficient between our prediction on the themes and the prevalence of the disease. Solutions should really be local when you think about it. They, again, what's going on in the state is not the exact same thing. So, there should be levels of risk being talked about in each and every market. In total, there are 6% of all COVID cases are in Texas as well. And really, this should be interdisciplinary approach versus a multidisciplinary approach. We want to share ideas with experts on using data, on trying to move forward with the economy and understanding the economy. So you have local state government leaders that are able to analyze and understand the factors. When you look at data like this, they're able to make a better strategy versus that one size fits all that you see so often in the media. It helps planners determine the future of potential hotspots. Again, we're able to monitor where those hotspots are. It's not the entire state. I can't say that enough. In business, we're able to, I want to talk about a recent poll where 54% of the US employees are concerned with exposure to COVID-19. So if you take the issue of San Jose versus New York, you have 400,000 people traveling on transit every day. In New York, you have 5 million. The density is higher. Preconditions are higher. So you can start to actually use a scorecard at different levels of geography to make decisions also about the workforce. And we have workplace interaction built into this model. So we can start to see which occupations would also start to be at risk in an area that was showing to be in a micro area that might be showing high risk. For employees to feel safe, they need to know that their employer has taken measures. Again, PPE in place for whether it's government institutions like colleges and universities, hospitals, and the workplace, all need to understand what the risk is up front, and they need to understand that risk at a more micro level. Even when we look at students in colleges, we can start to go a step further and use psychographic segmentation. Where do people live? What is their background? How does that relate back to the scorecard and risk? We can really start to understand, for example, should we be running a 200-person theater class versus some of the other classes? What kind of model should the institution or college or university utilize with respect to the risk that we're seeing and where the students are coming from? We want to help people make better decisions, and that is what the risk index is all about. So to recap, we want to assess unique situations of communities. We need, as a result, we can create finely tuned strategies, and we can communicate and lead instead of a complete blanket approach to one size fits all with respect to planning the future of the economy. There is more information on this on the index and the interactive application, and the one I've started already to build for Texas that can be seen at this address that you see on your screen right now. I will turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Muller, at this point.
Wonderful, thank you, Wayne. I'm just going to share my screen at this point. Will allow me to. All right. Great, thank you, Wayne. So there's two angles that we're sort of taking in this, thinking around this issue of preparing higher ed to adapt and respond to the situation. Part of it is sort of preemptive planning and responsive planning, like Wayne has outlined, what you're able to do and prepare for when you have some statistically significant indicators of what your risk and the kinds of risk are that you may be facing. That's a forward-looking kind of preparation. The work that I've been doing is more around actually tracking what the consequences of COVID have been in the hiring activity in the market. And primarily at this point, I'm going to talk today about how the activity in job postings has shown trends in what's happening out there in response to the initial shutdown and then the initial easing up of that. So Emsi maintains a constant stream of job postings in our job postings database. And we can actually monitor new job postings that are uploaded on a daily basis. And we've been tracking that just to see where the hiring activity has fallen off, and in some cases where it's picked up as a result of the pandemic situation. So we essentially track those postings. We're then attempting to quantify the impact on hiring, firstly of the initial wave and shutdown, which we, for the purposes of this conversation anyway, define as the middle of March through the end of April. I know the middle of March feels like 10 years ago at this point, but that was around about the date that things got serious in terms of businesses closing shop and that sort of thing. And then the 1st of May was when there was a more significant push to try and open things up again. And so we've called the period from May through June the recovery period, at least the initial recovery period. In some cases, that's just been a continuation of the impact, and it's been a decline in posting activity. In some cases, we've seen things turn around. And then specifically, we then try to look at the impacts on the hiring market for specific programs that are relevant to the Texas Association of Community Colleges. In this particular case, we've broken that out by the 6 main regions that considers at the larger scale. We can do this down to the county scale, and certainly doing work for an institution at the individual scale is something that we are about to unleash, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But for the purposes of this, we just wanted to showcase what's happening at a sort of regional scale. We have an impact index that we break out into a scale from -5 to +5 that basically captures what the percentage change in the average daily new postings activity across those windows, the initial impact window and then the recovery window. And so if you're seeing a -5 or a +5, that's a change that's over 100%. From 1 through 4, that's for each of the quartiles leading up to that. So basically a -2 or a +2 is around about a restriction or a reduction in postings of about 50%, or an increase in about 50%. In order to identify what the programs are of interest to each of these regions, we looked up the IPEDS data for each of the colleges within each of the 6 regions and aggregated those completions to get a sense of which are the most important programs by enrollment numbers. And I'll show you a few different ways that we can look at those results now. So the first thing I'd just like to show is a bit of a regional overview of what's hiring, or what's happening in terms of regional hiring. So this is not necessarily specific to institutional programs, but what's happening in the region. Each of you will, I hope, know which region you're in, and you can see these are color-coded. These are 2-digit SOC occupations, so fairly high-level aggregations of occupational activity. And we can see that this on the left-hand side here, we have the initial impact during the March through April period. And we can see a universally substantial reduction of pretty much at least 50%, sometimes as much as 75%. And this is an aggregate change across all of the occupations within these, all of these 6-digit occupation codes within these large aggregations. You'll see on the next slide, I've got some other occupations as well, so we'll get to that. I've tried to break them out into 2 general categories of occupations. These are probably more focused on the community college market. And the following slide is probably blending between the community college and the university market in terms of the target occupations. What's promising here is that we can see there was, of course, a universal reduction in posting activity, particularly in these kinds of occupations. But we've seen a pretty strong rebound through May and June. Now, this is essentially a 50 or 75% improvement on the posting activity during that impact period. So for us to get back to what was happening prior to March, essentially, we would have to be looking at indexes of 5 or higher. And so we're not seeing any of these occupations returning to their pre-COVID levels of hiring, but we are seeing a pretty robust response. Now, of course, in the case of Texas in particular, things are getting quite serious in Texas at the moment. So it's likely that we're going to see another contraction in hiring activity. But the initial response to opening up was robust and promising. So, you know, I show this because I think it's important for us to keep in mind that, yes, we've seen very broad and significant reductions in hiring activity and, of course, very significant unemployment. But we're also seeing a pretty rapid uptick when the markets open up again. So we don't want to be too prescriptive about what these trends mean. They're very short-term trends during very turbulent times, but it does suggest that the markets are eager to get back to work, which I don't think is a surprise to any of us, but it is somewhat pleasing to see how significant the market response is. Now, if we look at occupations that might be associated with four-year associate degrees at the community college level and some bachelor degree kinds of programs, we see that there are some areas where actually during that initial impact period, we actually saw an increase in postings activity. It varies by region. So you can see across Texas that in some cases we have a fairly even split between whether we saw an increase or a decrease in opportunities by region. It's difficult for me to draw too many conclusions from this without doing a very deep and detailed analysis on the Texas industries, which we have not had the opportunity to do. But, for instance, in legal occupations, we can see that there's a pretty even split. And then up here in the arts, design, entertainment, sports, media, this has been, journalism has seen quite a bit of activity, and the entertainment sectors as well. There are certain kinds of occupations within these sectors that have done well. And teaching in particular has seen strong hiring throughout this period. And again, promising to see on the right-hand side here that, we are seeing pretty strong, although more modest, increases in posting activity, but also a lot of occupational areas that have actually declined and continue to decline in posting activity. And I think that what you're seeing here is, these kinds of jobs are those first wave of occupations that were essentially all sent home and off the books in March and April, but then were eagerly sought to return to work through May and June. These kinds of jobs tend to be a little more stable, and so we see that perhaps the reductions in postings were a little less intensive, and the growth in return to hiring has been a little less intensive as well. It's the signals are somewhat dampened by the nature of the work, and a lot of these occupations are the kinds of occupations that you can continue to do working from home, less so these kinds of occupations. Obviously, we're looking at a pretty high-level occupational aggregation here, so we have to keep that in mind. Within each of these, there are significant variations across occupations, and we do have the ability to look at that stuff in much higher resolution, which we can talk about a little bit later as well. So another way to look at this is just to look at which occupations in your regions we're seeing resilient and growing hiring. So I've highlighted here occupations that were around about 0 or -1 through to the positives. So when I say resilient, I mean we didn't see a very precipitous drop-off in hiring activity. So, we see quite a wide array of occupations here that were and have held steady. In this case, we're looking at an aggregate impact across the whole period from March through to the end of June, not broken up by impact and recovery periods. A lot of these stronger areas are driven by hiring in education. Education has been a significant employer and hirer throughout this process. And so that's part of what is driving us. In the sciences, we see a lot of push into research and a lot of computer and analytical jobs that have just, in companies that have maintained their work, they've continued to hire. I mean, Emsi itself is a great example of this. We've of course been impacted, but we are fortunate to have continued to be able to work and actually continue to grow throughout this process because we're working on the front lines to an extent. A lot of these healthcare occupations have held steady. When you look at specific occupations within these, we have seen a drop off in some cases. You know, a lot of kinds of healthcare took a real hit because certain kinds of healthcare services were diminished. But of course, pulmonary therapists and a lot of nurses have been in high demand. On the flip side, areas that have seen strong contractions in hiring, these are all down to the 3s and 4s. Obviously, a lot of the stuff is related to the kinds of jobs that one has to be there in person for: agriculture, construction, maintenance, a lot of office admin positions as offices have closed down. So, you know, a lot of this makes sense to what we sort of know from media coverage and what our gut instincts tell us about what sectors have been hit. But it is very helpful to have data to drive decision-making about this kind of stuff. So this sort of sets the regional context for what's happening in Texas across these major regions. Now, what we can actually do is we can look at the specific programs in your regions and how those are impacted based on the occupations that these programs map to. So what I've got here first is an overview, a comparison basically, of each of the 6 regions and the 5 largest programs in each of your regions. Not surprisingly, general studies and liberal arts are up top. Basically, you know, this shows that all of these major programs are facing a significant downturn in hiring. You know, one exception is welding in the South region, which has seen an increase. You know, digging into what's driving these specific results is something that we can work with individual institutions to figure out what's really driving this stuff, because there are aggregations of occupations within each of these overall impact results. But you know, this does show that your flagship programs, in terms of the ones that have the highest enrollment across your regions, probably do need attention, because your completers are heading into a job market that is going to be tough. And we can talk a little bit towards the end about some work that Emsi is doing to try and contribute to TAC efforts on this front. I'll just pause this for a moment so you can digest, and if you have questions about specifics, we can perhaps tackle that at the end. I will next go through each of the regions specifically and just show some more detailed risk and opportunity numbers for each of your regions respectively. So if we look at the central region, now what we've done now is we've essentially ranked programs by those with the highest negative impact score and the highest positive impact scores. So this tells you which of the programs in the region, again, aggregated across the institutions within that region, and I filtered for programs that are completions of at least 10, which of those are facing the toughest job market, and which of them are actually facing some upticks in hiring. Again, a lot of the specific, we're starting to see specific occupations here. These are occupations at the 6-digit scale. A lot of healthcare roles that are that are technical roles and sort of general healthcare and technology and supporting roles that have taken a knock as healthcare facilities have been sort of preserved for COVID uptick in COVID cases. So we do see quite a few healthcare kinds of positions that have seen quite a downtick. And then of course, things that we would expect to see, mechanics, culinary arts, fire science and firefighting. That's one that we're aware of. You know, it's across the board. We see quite a variety of kinds of roles that are impacted. And so this kind of information is hopefully helpful for institutions to prioritize which of the programs you want to perhaps invest time and energy into beefing up in some sense. You know, Emsi has a lot of interesting skills data that we can contribute to that kind of conversation. What programs have completers that are entering a tough market, and what skills might you want to either add to that curriculum or emphasize that's already being taught in the curriculum to make those candidates more competitive once they're out in the market. On the flip side, we have good opportunities here. A lot of these top ones are driven by increases in educational opportunities, teaching opportunities. All four of these top ones, I had a closer look, are associated with post-secondary teaching in one form or another. But of course, you know, respiratory care, no surprise there that we're seeing a real need for that. And journalism, as I mentioned, has also seen an uptick. And, you know, some of these jobs that are continuing to work from home quite competently, animation and interactive technology, that kind of stuff, radio and television. You know, interesting results here to sort of explore. I wouldn't take, it's tough to make sort of really broad generalizations, but it's really good wheat to chew and grind out of the chaff of all of the data that we have out there on this. So if we look at the East, you know, we see quite a bit of consistent results across all these regions. You'll see that there is quite a bit of consistency, but also quite a bit of variability as well, because the regions, as we saw in some of those early results, do vary substantially in the hiring and the industries within those regions. So I don't want to take up too much time talking about specific cases. I'll just give a few moments here for viewers from each of these regions to digest some of these results. And of course, we will provide you with the slides, and you can take the time to digest this in greater detail. Yeah, so interesting that, you know, we do see that the industry does matter quite substantially. You know, it's something that we need to take into account when we think about what's happening to occupations. You know, what we're showing you today is really driven by occupational hiring trends. But as you can see here, if we look at technicians in different industries, airframe mechanics, you know, this is aircraft manufacturing versus more traditional ventilation type of stuff, which obviously is very important under the COVID context, that, you know, the applications of these occupations are really significantly important to whether they are significantly impacted to the negative or to the positive. Again, just showing the value of this kind of resolution of data and being able to really see what's happening in the boundary regions. And so again, just while we're sort of going through this a little slowly, you know, these impact scores, they represent the change in the average daily postings in new jobs within the regions, in this case over the period from March through to the end of June. Again, journalism opportunities showing up twice up here, and a lot of digital jobs still doing very well. We've got the Southeast. And in all cases, we're seeing, you know, around about half the posting activity that we were seeing prior to COVID. You know, a -3 is closer to a third of the posting activity that we've seen. So some of these are pretty significant declines. But, you know, a score up here of into the twos, we're seeing about a 50% increase in posting activity. So these are non-trivial. And again, you know, in previous examples, we saw that fire science and firefighting was declining in some regions, but in the Southeast, we've actually seen hiring increasing. So there are very regionally specific trends happening here. And I have no doubt that if we were to look at these results down to the actual service areas for each of your individual institutions, we would see even more variability. And then finally, at West. Interesting that here we have accounting in decline. But again, bioscience, farm management, radiology, but then a lot of roles associated with teaching opportunities and a lot of kinds of jobs that have just continued to tick along quite nicely working from home. So this gives you a sense of the kind of insights that we can provide at the 6-digit occupation scale tied to specific zip codes. Again, aggregated for these regions, but we can do this for each of your institutions individually. So at this point, that has wrapped up the crux of the results that I wanted to present. Just talk a little bit about what else we have to offer on this front. Emsi has a great resources page where you can access Wayne's amazing health index tool, where we have a whole bunch of studies that we've done and literature that keeps track of, or that can help you keep track of studies that we're doing the whole time. Live data that we provide for free on postings activity across the country. We also have a free regional impact report. This is closer to what I was showing at the beginning, where it's not tied to a specific program. It's just more of a regional summary of, you know, just what's happening on the ground there. We're also now preparing to start selling a program response report. This would be what I was alluding to, which is a very tailored analysis of your specific institutional programs. We aggregate impact and recovery scores for each of your zip codes for your specific region. You can specify the service region and we will, you know, account for that. And showing you opportunities and risk areas for each of those programs. And then, of course, there's this 300,000 in 300 days project that I'm sure all of you are aware of. And Emsi is actually working hard to pull together a proposal to try and assist you folks with that. We have, you know, a professional profiles database that has over 100,000 individuals. So we have a lot of data about individuals' educational and work history. We use that to do professional pathways analysis. We tie that in with labor market information, like I've been showing you today about job postings activity. And so we can associate the occupations in your region that are facing tight hiring markets and identifying populations that need to be upskilled or reskilled. We can then cross-reference that with occupations in the region that are in need of talent and figure out what skills are necessary to help those individuals transition from at-risk occupations to in-need occupations. We can cross-reference that with health index risks, with things like automation risks, and with Emsi's pretty amazing skills data. We haven't had the time to show any of that today, but we are able to present skills in need down to the MSA scale and the state scale. And we can do some pretty amazing stuff tying skill demand in your region back to programs and helping inform the pathways that you might want to consider in trying to meet this 300 by 300,000 goal. So that's the the gist of the meat that I think Wayne and I wanted to share with you folks today. And looks like we still have a good chunk of time to field some questions. So
I did want to add that I am seeing a lot of companies ask us about stay-at-home workforce. So we are developing an index now on that, on which markets where there are strong stay-at-home workforce based on industry. I also did want to address one of the questions, which were about the currency of the data. It is the COVID report in the interactive application is live from Johns Hopkins, overlaid with our model about where we predicted risk would be high. And so with respect to those variables, not much changes over a period of time. A lot of that is demographically driven. When it comes to preconditions, we know who's buying drugs for diabetes, heart, we know who's smoking. And so that data changes every 6 months. We get an update on those numbers. So we're not only are we very current with our data, we are also modeling that data at a very micro level. So, and I started with the markets, and we can go down to the zip code with respect to where risk is.
So we have a question here about where people can download the regional impact report on the Emsi site. So I don't know if one of you could even pull that up and show where someone could access it.
Sure. Lucas, are you on the line? Perhaps not. Let me see if I can pull up this website for you folks. So, quickly share my screen again. All right, so this is the COVID resources page. And I guess we can just have a quick look at what we have here. So we have quite a bit. And maybe it's worth taking a few moments just to sort of show some of the stuff, since I didn't mention all of it. Resume Optimizer, this is a tool to help individuals craft impactful resumes that are using labor market language. So we analyze the job postings to identify what skills are being sought after in job postings. And we can then analyze your resume and pull out the skills that you've mentioned, and then suggest skills that you may want to incorporate into the language of your resume. That's what this Resume Optimizer is here. The job postings dashboard, this is a view that you can, well, let's click on it. You can track job postings activity anywhere in the country. You can see occupations, companies, job titles, this kind of detail. This is, again, just a sense of what's happening on the ground at the moment over the last sort of like 30 days, that kind of view. And again, this is job postings data. And of course, every job posting has job title and a company, so we can start to get into company level information, which is quite interesting. We also have this for Canada, for what that's worth to Texas. Although it's certainly interesting to Wayne, who's in Texas and off to Canada in a few minutes. Now, Skills Match, this is a pretty amazing tool, actually, that will allow an individual to essentially define themselves in terms of skills. You can hop online and you can input your prior work experience and education, and essentially create a skill shape for yourself, and choose skills that you would like to require in order to pursue career goals, and basically get pointers towards online educational resources and job postings related to that stuff. This is currently available to individuals for free. We are selling it to educational institutions as a tool that we then work with the institution to tag institutional curriculum with skills, so that students at that institution can then log on, can build their own skill profile, can then get recommendations for courses from your institution that will then service your particular career needs. So this is a pretty amazing new tool that Emsi has. And if you're interested in learning more about that, highly suggest reaching out to Lucas. On the research side, we are publishing lots of interesting stuff. Here we have some examples of research studies. I won't get into the details here, but they are here. This is the health index work that Wayne showed. There's a great white paper that gets into all the juicy details, and we'll give you a link to the actual tool. It's really a remarkable tool. We have some past webinars as well, and I am wondering why the regional impact report.
Stuart, I'll jump in here too. The regional impact report link is located under our solutions area in the higher ed section, and I also posted that link to request that in the Q&A section there too. So
all right,
basically,
great.
Fill out the form that sends us a request, and then we will process that report and then get that back to you.
Yeah, we have a few questions we need to clarify from you before we can run that report for you, but that's something we are still doing and would be happy to do. I think that the price point for the COVID response report, which will target your specific institution and programs, I believe that's about $3,000. So we've tried to keep that price point as low as possible, and that will give you summary impact and recovery indices for every one of your programs, and then we'll give you a detailed breakout for 10 programs by the individual occupations that are mapped to each of those programs. So you can either pick the 10 largest programs by completions, or we can do sort of a 5-3-2, the 5 largest programs, the 3 programs with the worst hit job markets, and the 2 programs with the most promising job markets. All right, let's see what other questions we have here. Appear to be 2 north charts in the last image. Was that a typo? Possibly.
So that was the one on the program slide. I think it was the slide with all the IPEDS data programs for every region on it. And so if that is an error, if you could just address it before we post the slides, then that would be great.
Absolutely. Oh, maybe in this.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, it looks like one may have just been mislabeled, that we're missing a
Oh,
Y.
I see. So absolutely, yeah.
And then the other question, which was from earlier in the presentation, so you might need to go back, is do you know if jobs in the impact recovery indexes are within the same salary range?
For what we've been showing you, not. We have sort of aggregated the occupations that map to these programs using the NCES SIPTOSOC map. If an institution had a custom SIPTOSOC map that they would prefer for us to use, we can. And we also have in the COVID response report, we do actually break out each of the individual occupations that comprise or that map to a given program. And we do provide the individual impact scores for those occupations and the salary range. So you would get that salary sort of signal associated with the occupation in the COVID response report. And we should be able to share an example of what the response report looks like. If not by the end of this week, then I believe next week. We are very close to finalizing that and unleashing it. So we should be able to share an example of that report next week. If you're interested, please contact Lucas and we will send you that example.
Thank you. And if members of our audience have more questions, please keep those coming in. I have a couple more here. So I know that you addressed this earlier, but could you please again help us understand how an occupation like nursing is down? You would think in the middle of this health crisis that medical institutions would need more nurses, not that postings would be down for nurses. So could you please provide a little more context to that finding?
Sure. Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive at first, but it's actually a widespread phenomenon that we've observed and is known to be the case, which is that a lot of hospitals have substantially reduced the services that they're providing in preparation for an influx of COVID cases. So a lot of elective surgeries have been on hold. A lot of elective healthcare has basically been on the back burner. And so we've seen quite a significant decline in hiring nurses in general. Obviously, the one case where we do see upticks in nursing is particularly associated with pulmonary conditions and that kind of nursing and ICU nursing. But in general, most nurses are not working in ICUs and are not working on lung issues. They're working on all sorts of other things. And there was just a huge slowdown in general healthcare provisions to essentially make room for the COVID influx. Wayne, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, so I don't know if you want to chime in here with additional.
No, I think you've hit all the right scenarios here. I know from personal experience that for example, elective cases at children's hospitals, for example, in both Houston and Dallas have stopped, and to make provision for COVID cases. And even to the point where those doctors are starting to work with those ped surgeons are now, working with COVID patients.
Now, I must say, it would be interesting to see, to track the hiring activity around nursing in particular and its various manifestations in Texas, for instance, right now, as things are, as the healthcare needs are becoming more intensive. So we'll probably find that a lot of nurses are being pulled in who have been not doing a lot of these elective surgeries. But as those, as that capacity runs dry, particularly as a lot of healthcare providers get sick themselves, I would not be surprised to see an uptick in hiring once that sort of state of affairs is reached. But in general, it's not surprising to see hiring for nursing down.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps to clarify what's happening. So we have just a couple minutes left, and I don't know if you all had any final thoughts you wanted to share with our audience today before we sign off.
I just want to reiterate the issue of decisions being made at the community level versus the state level. I think that we have the data to be able to do that and be able to assess risk in all the communities across the great state of Texas. So, we should continue to open the economy where risk is lowered, and not necessarily put a halt on the economy, but certainly put in PPE instruction into the economy that allows it to keep moving along and then improving over time.
Yeah, and on my side of the equation, the fact that we were able to essentially track market activity live these days by tracking daily job postings activity, it really does give us live insights into what is happening at a very localized scale. And so just like we need to be making locally informed decisions based on health risks, we should be making locally informed decisions about what programs to prioritize our attention and effort into based on local needs. And those needs aren't necessarily just hiring needs, they're also hiring constraints.
And economic stability is going forward in this pandemic economy is most definitely an interdisciplinary approach. It takes people and data from different disciplines to strengthen our communities.
Yeah, adaptability, I would say, is probably the name of the game at the moment. And data is essential for that. So we can be of further assistance. We are here to help. It's been a busy 4 months, and but it's been important work.
And if anyone needs to get in touch with our friends from Emsi, please get in touch with me, Christy Short. My email address is just kshort@tacc.org. And you can also find me on our TAC website. So happy to get you in touch with our presenters today. And as mentioned previously, this recording will be posted on our website and the slides will also be added. So the recording will be up by later this afternoon after it's processed and uploaded. So check back later today for that information. So with that, I want to thank our presenters so much for their time today, and thank you all for coming and learning and participating in our webinar. So thanks and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Our pleasure.